Donc, bonjour et bienvenue au cas de gestion de crise. Pouvez-vous confirmer la lettre de votre équipe?
I.
Parfait. Préférez-vous les règlements français ou en anglais? En anglais? Parfait. Donc, for this case, you will have 20 minutes to make your presentation in front of the judges. If your presentation lasts under than 18 minutes, you will receive 1 point penalty for every 30 seconds. If your presentation lasts under 15 minutes, your team will receive the score of 0 at the general ranking. If after 20 minutes you have not completed the presentation, you will be stopped. At the end of the presentation, the judges will have 5 minutes to ask their question. I remind the jury that it's mandatory to ask a minimum of 1 question during this period. If after 5 minutes you have not finished answering the question, you will be stopped. After you heard the question, you will have, throughout the presentation, I will indicate the remaining time using cardboards at 10 minutes, 5 minutes, 2 minutes, and 30 seconds. I will make a countdown using my fingers for the last 10 seconds. I remind you that that is prohibited to say the name of your university. If you do, you will receive a penalty. I also remind the public that it is prohibited to use any electronic device during the presentation, and that must stay quiet until the end of the period of question. I will now ask the judges to present themselves, and after you will be free to start your presentation.
Je m'appelle Émilie Delmeur, je suis conseillère en ressources humaines pour les jardins.
Olivier Gassin, HR Business Partner for Slovak.
I'm Christophe Olifort, professor here at London University, expert in crisis management.
Dans une situation de crise, l'être humain a 3 réactions possibles, soit figer, fuir ou bien se défendre. Bonjour mesdames et messieurs, chers juges, mon nom est Alexandra, je suis ici avec mes collègues Patrick et Stéphanie. Et aujourd'hui, nous ne sommes pas là pour vous donner une stratégie pour fuir ou figer. On est là pour vous donner des recommandations pour vous défendre et vous donner les meilleures solutions proactives pour la situation présente. Je vais maintenant continuer la présentation en anglais, mais vous pouvez toujours demander des questions en français vers la fin, nous sommes tous bilingues. So why are we here today? Well, today we are here to provide le ministère de la Sécurité publique du Québec with a comprehensive action plan to mitigate the CAME ship crisis that happened and establishing preventative measures for the future in order for this to not happen again. The way we're going to do this is by answering 3 key questions. The first one being, who should be mobilized to manage this crisis? Secondly, what actions can be taken to reduce the impact of the situation at hand? And finally, what preventative measures should be put in place for the future? I'm now going to pass it off to my colleague Patrick to go into an analysis of the situation.
Thank you, Alex. So just to begin, let's take a look at the freighter crisis itself. So what happened? Well, the first indicator of a crisis came when at the Halifax Pier, a fire occurred in the operations room of the freighter. But the equipment was verified by the RCMP as well as the crew, and the go-ahead was given to continue on the trip if they deemed necessary. And the captain took the decision to continue with the trip and move on to the final destination where repairs would take place. And this was done because of the time pressures that he was under in this situation. So you're looking at the need to account for the repair time that's coming, that was going to be in place, the busy upcoming season, as well as seasonal weather concerns such as high tides. So this resulted in an inadequate preparation for the second crisis, when another fire took place, also due to the same electrical issues, and caused explosions in the petroleum tanks that then spread to the Labitte area, as well as caused the spread of chemical substances into the water nearby. Now, another important thing to take into account here is that the ship that was in question was in compliance with all standards from Transport Canada related to transporting dangerous chemicals. So the key takeaway here is that the crisis was rooted in both outdated standards that did not account for the needs of the current situation, as well as no framework for decision making for the captain that eliminate the business pressures that he was under in this situation. Let's take a look at the stakeholders and their role in the situation that occurred. So first of all, CAME was forced to rebrand because it had a poor safety record. And so it has a history of poor safety with many issues in the past. Furthermore, it failed to recognize the first signs of a crisis and take action immediately. So the actions that it could have taken to prevent this crisis from taking place was ensuring that not only is it compliant to safety regulations, but as someone who is, as a company that has kind of had a bad track record in the past, it needs to become a leader in its industry in safety and go beyond simple compliance. It needs to find the best practices out there. Next, Transport Canada. Now, Transport Canada has policies in place for transporting dangerous substances, but they are 27 years old. They fail to take into account things like technological developments and the new equipment that current ships are operating with. So it needs to ensure that their policies were up to date with industry equipment and technology going forward. Now to the village de Saguenay, prioritization was not given to a potential crisis occurring at the pier. So in order to, so what should have been done was giving the right amount of putting an emphasis on these crisis prevention and emergency procedures before any of these crises can have the chance to occur. It's all about preparation. And finally, the Ministère de la Sécurité Publique. The Ministère had no action plan in place to address this crisis, and that is what we're being called in to address in this situation. So the important thing that they have in, when facing another crisis is to ensure that they have action plans in place before a crisis takes place, and they're not acting on their feet once a crisis is actually coming into occurrence. Other stakeholders in this situation are the Ministère de l'Environnement, who will be responsible for the cleanup of the chemicals that have been spilled, as well as the Board of Transportation of Canada, who will be able to investigate this issue and make recommendations accordingly. So here, all responsible parties must be involved in this crisis' resolution, and they need help from these other relevant parties who will be able to help mitigate the areas that they have more of a focus on and an expertise in. Now let's take a look at public stressors. Right now, there is a lot of chaos surrounding the situation, and the victims of it are the citizens of La Ville. So they will have different stressors that are going to be occurring throughout the situation. The first one is the ongoing crisis. So there is still a fire, the fire is still existing in La Ville, and so they need to have clear directions on how to evacuate and and need to know clearly what is being done to resolve the issue. Next, they need to work, their concerns further down the line will be the water contamination. Where will this contamination spread to? So that needs to be assessed, and notice needs to be given to anyone who will be affected by this. Then, there's also the concern of post-traumatic stress. A lot of these citizens will have post-traumatic stress. Many of their family members may have been injured or potentially may have perished in this incident. So it's important to be there and support them as a community going forward. And finally, it's important to ensure future community safety, making sure that their home was rendered unsafe by this situation. It's important that they can feel safe at home again and know that this kind of situation will not occur. So the Saguenay community has concerns that need to be addressed throughout the entire crisis process, and these are the backbone of our solution. I'm now going to pass it off to Alex to go into the first part of our presentation.
Thank you, Patrick. So there's a lot going on right now. There's a lot of chaos surrounding this situation, and there are lives at risk. So it's important to now take a step back and consider all of this. And in order to really be able to act accordingly, you need to realize that there are time constraints, and this is an urgent situation. And this is where your instincts are going to kick in. So we are happy to present to you our solution, which is safety instincts. So this is a comprehensive action plan to extinguish the current crisis at hand and to prevent any future occurrences, or if there are future occurrences, to make sure you are better prepared. The way we're going to be doing this is a three-pronged approach. The first being identifying. This is where we're going to be establishing a crisis management team and a communication plan for the current situation. Next, we're going to be extinguishing. So this is where we're going to take action to ensure that there's a reduction of the impacts for the situation currently at hand. So what are we going to do to make sure that the most people as possible can stay safe? And finally, heal. This is where we're going to put in place the preventative measures to ensure better control in future crises if they occur, which we hope they don't. So now moving forward at our implementation adding plans, what tactics exactly are we going to be using in order to accomplish this? First of all, for identify, it's really about building that crisis management team, but also outlining their roles. What is each person doing? What is the important part of their role, and why are they necessary and essential to the team? And finally, a communication map of how the communication among these members is going to take place. This will be happening as soon as possible, ideally tomorrow morning or even today in a few hours when we wake up. So extinguishing, this is where we're going to be providing timely solutions, also transparent actions, and empathetic communication in order to make sure that the way that all these actions are going to be displayed to the public is timely, transparent, and empathetic. This will be between now and 2 weeks from now. And finally, the healing phase. This is where we're going to make a formal crisis management team without the constraints of time. Next, a crisis management plan, or multiple plans depending on the crises at hand. And finally, safety drills. And this will be happening once the current situation is under control. So we are estimating a month or more afterwards, depending on how long this crisis is taking place for. So now I'm going to pass it off to my colleague Stephanie to go a little bit deeper into the first phase of the implementation.
Thank you, Alex. So looking at the identify phase, which is really about establishing your immediate crisis management team and their roles within. So we suggest that you contact 3 main bodies, the first of which being the government, and we suggest that you include all the levels of the government, so the Minister of Public Security, the Minister of the Environment, but as well as the Municipal Council, to come together and to really determine the appropriate immediate response resources to reduce impact to the public. Next, we suggest that you involve the Transportation Safety Board of Canada. And their role would really be to come in and to investigate the event that occurred, the causes, why, how, and provide recommendations for how you can prevent such crises in the future. And lastly, external. So this includes involving the company, the legal counsel, as well as PR representatives. And this is really to ensure that you're provided with all the necessary information that you need, information that you might not be able to gather on your own, and as well as to help with communication dissemination. So communication dissemination would really be allocated to the PR representatives. There's a lot of people that are going to be affected by this, and there's a lot of channels to disseminate information through. So you want to make sure that you have enough people on board to effectively disseminate that information through the channels. So looking at the internal communication map. So how will important information be communicated internally? So first, looking at the primary communication. This is the meeting held by the immediate crisis management team, composed of the 3 bodies on the previous slide. And they're going to come together and create a comprehensive action plan. Once that plan has been put in place, you need to disseminate it through the lower levels, so secondary communication. And that's going to look something like this. So it might be a little hard to read, I apologize, but it starts with the Minister of Public Security. And he's going to contact the department heads below him, I believe there's 7 or 8, through in-person meetings, but as time is a factor, if that is not possible, then through conference calls. And so he's going to disseminate the comprehensive action plan to them, and then they will then communicate that to their respective employees through team meetings as well as follow-up emails. And we all know that communicating to your employees is very important in a time of crisis, but it's also important to remember that you need to be collecting information from them. So that's the second half of the circle. So it starts with the respective employees who are going to be having one-on-one meetings with the department heads again, as well as filing out incident reports. So the department heads get a good idea of how the resources are being allocated. Should they allocate more? Should they have allocated less? And the feedback coming from the community. Once that's been done, the department heads will then translate that information to the Minister of Public Security through follow-up meetings in the short term, as well as formal reports in the long term.
Thank you, Stephanie. So now let's look at the actions that we can take right now in order to reduce the impacts of this crisis. So first of all, let's look at the timely actions we can take. So this includes your external communication. So really reaching out to nearby towns and asking them if they have some resources, either medical or in terms of firefighters and such. So emergency services, because right now, if it's very likely that you will need more than what you currently have. And so it's ideal in the timely situation to really get those people that are nearby to you. Also, clarifying the evacuation plans. If this fire continues, to know the evacuation plans and to be able to properly communicate them with the public so that they feel prepared and safe and they know where to go if they need to evacuate. Afterwards, continuous updates and issuing warnings. So we know that the water is potentially contaminated, and this could come along with warnings for the public about this situation, but also really being clear and timely with everything that's happening in the situation, because people have loved ones that aren't there right now who want to know what's happening and they want updates. So having your PR team, the PR members that are on the crisis management team, really in charge of communicating that information in a timely manner through social media and also push notifications. There is the option to send push notifications through people's smartphones to get updates, so that would be a really good idea for those who are directly affected in the area. Moving forward, for transparent, what we can do to be very transparent in this situation is having a press release with the actions that you will be taking. So those actions can include a dedicated evacuation center for those that need to evacuate, and also a dedicated medical area, so a hospital. That's really where everyone who's affected can go straight to, so that you have all those victims in one place. Afterwards, also emergency services near the port, so having more emergency services there for the people who need them. Doing an impact assessment of the water, so making sure if it is contaminated to what degree and just having that information ready. Next, investing in safety, so making sure that you can invest as much as you can right now in safety and really showing the public that that's a priority for you. And finally, outlining that you will be working together with Transport Canada to outline new compliance requirements. And finally, for empathetic, this is really providing public resources to the public. So a hotline for information that loved ones can call. Also, maybe a page on your website with frequently asked questions about this so that they can get the information quickly. Recommending some vigils, and also maybe making a monument to honor victims in the future to show them that this is a severe situation that you take seriously, and to show empathy as well to the people who are affected, and being able to reach out to those affected families. And I'm going to pass it back to Stephanie to finish us off.
Thanks, Alex. So, looking at the heal phase, how are you going to put in place preventative measures to ensure better control in future crises? So how are you going to upgrade your defense to ensure that you're best prepared if situations like this or other situations that pose a threat to your community happen? The first step in this is to create a formal crisis management team. We recommended the creation of an immediate one earlier in the implementation, but considering the time constraint that was going on in the situation, we recommend now taking the time to expand that crisis management team to incorporate various departments. So this crisis management team would regularly meet to create various crisis management plans for plausible things that could go wrong within the town. And there's a couple of key points that we suggest these crisis management plans contain to be effective. The first is identifying signs of upcoming crises. So this would be ways to prevent the crisis from happening as early as possible. The second is criteria to assess the severity of the crisis. This is very important in knowing what resources to allocate and how many resources. The third would be a detailed action plan. The fourth would be a communication plan, as well as holding statements. So these are statements that you can prepare before for various crises. These are broad statements, and they are meant to be put out as soon as a crisis occurs. That just tells the public that you're aware that this is going on, that you're working on resolving it, and they're meant to be followed up later by more specific statements once more information is received. Then moving on to resource banks and contact lists. So having all the resources that you would need to handle the crisis, as well as the contact list in one place, easy to find, is a great idea. And lastly, procedures for documentation. So you want to make sure that you're documenting everything that you're doing for later use and review. And lastly, last but not least, it's running drills. So these drills are essential in identifying gaps that may be apparent, not so apparent in your crisis management plans, as well as testing the effectiveness and the functionality of different tools or equipment you might need to use. So there's 3 levels that these drills can occur in. The first is called tabletop exercises. So these are very low pressure, very informal meetings that can be held annually per crisis management plan. And this is just gathering all your employees around the table and really communicating the plans and procedures and steps they would have to follow for certain emergencies. Also giving them an opportunity to ask questions, and raise concerns. The second is goes a little bit deeper, so semi-simulated scenarios. And these can be held in addition to the tabletop exercises or in replacement of. So if you feel like an exercise needs a little bit more explanation, then you can hold this. And lastly, full-scale exercises. So this is requires mobilization of emergency services and requires that you notify and make sure your employees are very aware that this is going on beforehand. So what you can do tomorrow, so form a meet the crisis management team, as well as issue evacuation notices and other warnings. Reach out to nearby towns, see if they have any resources to spare, as well as make sure you're continuously updating those communication channels with the public. We can go further into the timeline in the Q&A if you guys have any questions, as well as the financials, and I'll pass it off to my colleague, Alexander.
Thank you, Stephanie. So we were here today in order to really provide you with a comprehensive action plan to mitigate the crisis at hand regarding the ship from the CAME, and really establishing preventative measures for the future as well. We did this by answering 3 key questions. The first one being, who should be mobilized to manage the crisis? So we outlined a crisis management team for the current situation and a crisis management team for further down the line. What actions can be taken to reduce the impact of the current situation at hand? And finally, what preventative measures should you put in place in the future? So we hope that this is something that you can implement as of tomorrow, because this situation is extremely urgent. And we really thank you for listening, and we now open the floor to questions.
J'avais une précision. En fait, je voudrais savoir votre premier point de presse. Qui sera au point de presse? Quand dans votre et où vous allez tenir, et les principaux messages que vous voulez passer?
Oui, donc pour le... Je vais répondre en anglais.
Oui.
Regarding the press release, this is going to be one of the PR executives on the crisis management team who's going to be handling that press release. And really, it's going to be done through the media in order to make sure that it is released to all the public so that they have the resources, like the necessary information that they need. And really the message we want to put out is the fact that there was a very severe situation that happened, and that you acknowledge that, and that there was a role that was played, that the ministry did have a role because of the compliances being they weren't up to date, and that you are really working on that, and you will be outlining different procedures in the future in order to be better and make sure that everyone is more safe moving forward. So really a statement of acknowledging, showing empathy, being transparent and being timely, and showing that you're doing something right now to fix the situation.
Why do you think a PR executive is better than the mayor of the town to hold that press conference?
So the essential thing with that is that we want the mayor to be involved with the actual implementation of the solution, and so it's focusing his or her energy on actually resolving the situation at hand, whereas the PR department can focus on the messaging. So it's about prioritization of what is most important in this time frame for the different stakeholders.
About the crisis team, who would lead and coordinate this crisis team? You will command us as the Ministerial Secretary to be part of this crisis team, but who would lead this team, and do we have to put ourselves under the authority of any kind of stakeholder?
It would essentially be the Minister of Public Security that would lead the team. Sorry, and if the team isn't able to work as harmoniously as wanted or anticipated together. If there's differences in differences in thought of the way things that should be handled, then we can suggest maybe bringing in some communication experts or specialists that will help mitigate and negotiate and communicate.
Okay. So what you recommend is that we send a kind of representative in this team to lead and coordinate the whole team. Is that right?
Yes.
Okay. Thank you. Thank you very much.